Howdy of you delicious people, I'm here today to review Mortal Kombat Battle of the Realms. So, I would say that this movie really mostly copies and pastes from Mortal Kombat Annihilation, but it kind of adds a little bit more story to where you can understand, like, why certain people had gone to do certain things much more so than the sequel movie had done from the original one. But it also does kind of take little bits and pieces from the Mortal Kombat 2021 movie. So they're kind of getting like bits and pieces of certain similar things, but delivered to you in a different way, supposedly. Uh, Also, we are having two different stories in this movie, which immediately I hated because I'm like, why can't you just tell one freaking story? Or just really just have one fluid story of whatever mission Scorpion and Sub-Zero and whoever else is going to be involved in, and then give us the tournament story uninterrupted to where like there was a lot of times where I was like, what is Scorpion doing in this movie? What is going on here? I am so confused because like they're telling two different stories, and immediately I hate that because reasonably like Arrow could tell you two different stories and you could understand it. This movie, I'm just like, I don't even understand what Scorpion is doing in this film, but eventually I could figure out what is to go on. So eventually I'll tell that story first, and then eventually we will get into the tournament, because I think the Scorpion part is much more important, and then I'll put a pin in that, and then eventually I'll get to why the Scorpion story was important towards the tail end of this thing, because it also ties into the tournament. So, going into this film, I would say that this movie isn't as good as Scorpion's Revenge. It's not as, like, I don't feel like it's as action-packed as the other film, to where I was just going, ooh, oh my god. Like, during, like, Scorpion's Revenge, I was like, wow, these fights are brutal. Like, these fights are just, like, great. And then I went into the sequel movie. I'm just kind of like, okay, the battles that are to go on are one, like the tournament battles are who cares, and it just feels like we like forget that we are to, like, they have to lead up to the tournament because they have to tell us new characters. They have to showcase certain people, and so, like, we have to showcase certain people before the tournament is to be had. So we have to explain, like, oh, this is a new guy for reasons. Like, he's just here, and there's no real origin story of this one character. It's just like, oh, he's here because he's another Mortal Kombat character. And basically they have to kind of replenish on the villain side. They kind of have to replenish a lot of their roster. So you're going to see a lot of different villain characters in this movie, which I thoroughly did like enjoy at some parts. Even though I felt like there were some characters that kind of feel like certain other Mortal Kombat characters, where I'm just like, oh, this has to be obviously like the Goro kind of character, and like there was a lot of like comparisons to other things while watching this film. But anyways, I would say that compared to the sequel, this one's probably a weaker thing. But if anybody is to really enjoy Mortal Kombat Annihilation, this might be the animated movie for you. Uh, but yeah, like it's sad that they had to do like two different stories. They couldn't have one cohesive connection between the two. They had to separate it. But yeah, that's all that I could probably say in a very cryptic like sense about this movie. And so I think it's about that time to go out of our way to say that it's almost that coveted time again to go into spoilers about this film. So if Mortal Kombat Scorpion's Revenge was possibly a great movie, I would say that this one takes like a step back and it's just like a solid okay movie because really there's a lot of stuff where I'm just like, okay, this just really isn't as fun as the original one. There is to not really be like, I wish that there would have been like one person that had a story that I could invest in at all during this movie, because really it's just like, okay, we're just really just tying onto Earthrealm, which I just was like, okay, so everybody is all the same kind of character now. Even Johnny Cage wasn't even as funny as in the first movie, where I'm like that was the one character I could invest in the original movie because he was funny. There's a lot of gags with Johnny Cage, and I thoroughly enjoyed this character. In the sequel, they kind of nerfed him, and he wasn't as funny. Yeah, he was still confident, and there were some spots that I did enjoy of Johnny Cage in this movie, but then again, like, this character was barely used to my liking, and plus there was no funny jokes or one-liners really coming from Johnny Cage in this movie whatsoever. So I just was like, well, this just sucks. Like, the one thing that I loved about the first one, they nerfed and they killed, basically, the way of which that this character was to approach this thing, and it just wasn't as fun as the original movie because there wasn't this consistent jokes being popped out of Johnny Cage. Really, just, I guess, ran out of stuff to joke about in the first film, obviously. So yeah, just was a weaker story. So let's go on to it. Let's go into that double five because it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time again to spoil this movie. So let's just immediately let's cover the very first opening part of this movie, and then I think what I'll do is I'll kind of go into the whole Scorpion story, because it kind like what Scorpion does is to not really be related at all of what's going on with Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, and Sonya and all those people. Like, it's basically he's doing his own thing, and then we have to put a pin in it because eventually what Scorpion is to do at the very end of what his mission is to conflict with the technically end of this movie. So we'll go into that. So very beginning of this movie, we are to see two parents who are running off with their baby in their hands, just going, "I'm gonna be running with my kid. I don't know why." And so all of a sudden, we have these characters called the Tarkantas, who, if you ever see like minions in this movie, the Tarkantas are basically like sprinkled throughout this whole entire thing as the minions in this movie. These guys who are to have these like spikes like being presented through their arms, and they have this like these spiked like teeth, and they're ugly as F. So the Tarkantas are to go on and just stab away at Liu Kang's parents while they're trying to climb this fence. And so all of a sudden, Lord Raiden is to appear to save, of course, the baby who is Liu Kang. And then Liu Kang's parents is to have one last little thing to say to Liu Kang before they pretty much die. So the Tarkantas are to all get killed off, of course, by Lord Raiden. Lord Raiden is to take this kid and to basically become his surrogate father. And there is to be one moment where it seems that Raiden was eventually to tell Liu Kang that, but that part ends up just getting just not all quite easily said. Let's just say. So really, that's the beginning of the movie where like we're just kind of like, okay, this is kind of like, this is a weird way to open this, but okay, whatever. Like, just kind of showcasing like what was to happen in the Mortal Kombat 2021 movie, a scene that we didn't get to see but now technically do because animated film. So pushing on, so like I said, let's carry on of what is to happen with really just Scorpion King, or this almost Scorpion King. The Dwayne the Rock Johnson. No. So let's talk about Scorpion. So Scorpion is to return to the Netherrealm after that whole Shang Tsung situation, and eventually he is to be returning to the Netherrealm to eventually meet a guy named Shinnok, which Shinnok is going to try and tell Scorpion that the key of which that Scorpion had obtained through that tournament is now supposedly bound to Scorpion's soul. So I guess if Scorpion was to ever just be like, "Hey man, where's my keys?" he would just be like, "Oh, it's within my soul." Okay, I guess to really just I guess if Scorpion is to get killed off for some reason or another, then like someone else will get the key latched onto their soul. So Shinnok is to tell Scorpion that he needs to go back to the Earth Realm to go to this place called the Temple of Elements to retrieve this artifact for him. And Scorpion is to refuse that just because, like, dude, I'm not going to do your dirty work. Like, you just go ahead and do that. Which technically this guy can't, because Scorpion is the only one who has this key who is to be able to open up this temple to get bizarrish artifact, weird looking thing, which I didn't really quite understand. Like, to me, this is like Thanos and the Infinity Stones all over again within this movie, where it seems Shinnok already has like all of these artifacts, like flying into the sky behind him, and he is just missing this one artifact. So, which will eventually combine together to eventually create this thing called the One Being, or this giant demon of a monster, which all of a sudden will have to Megazord up, Power Ranger reference, via the end of this movie, which means that someone will eventually have to go and turn into a giant monster as well to take on this One Being. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It probably does. So, while this is going on, we have Sub-Zero who is training with Smoke. Or who we are to believe is Sub-Zero, because it's not actually the same Sub-Zero from the Scorpion's Revenge thing. It's Sub-Zero's brother who is going to obtain to be the new Sub-Zero. Okay, sure, because Annihilation. So Smoke is training with new Sub-Zero, and he's like, "Hey man, like, you're good enough, like, I'm gonna give you like the Sub-Zero mask and you're gonna take on the mantle." And Sub-Zero's like, you know what, I'm not, like, I don't know if I quite want it yet. I don't think I've earned it yet. But that just leads to eventually Smoke and Sub-Zero going on to Len Kui, this Grandmaster. His first name is Lin. I'm going to butcher the last name because I don't know names well. I apologize. I'm going to butcher some stuff here. It's bound to happen. So, the Grandmaster is to be talking to Sub-Zero and Smoke and just say, like, well, hey, like, you know what? It'd be great if you guys just go out and try to go after Scorpion and try to take him out. But also, you guys aren't going to go alone. And also, you guys aren't going to just go as you are. We're going to have to upgrade you to be these more robotic-like beings, because, like, I can't trust that a human will solve all of this. So, all of a sudden, Lin is to pop out these two characters called Cyrax, and I think the other one is to be Sector, and both of these characters are now having to fight out both Sub-Zero and uh, and Smoke. And so eventually what is to happen here is while Sub-Zero and Smoke are to run away and to try to defeat these people, but there's too many rocket things going on, these characters are basically the Iron Men of this story. So it's basically like Smoke and Sub-Zero are kind of going to lose like this battle almost, because what ends up happening is Cyrex and Sector are to eventually go and corrupt Smoke. So this is like, for Star Trek fans, it's basically like the Borg. They're going to assimilate Smoke into turning Smoke into one of them, and so there'll be Smoke will be a robot eventually, just like these two other robots are. But eventually Sub-Zero is to have a wall kind of created blocking him from trying to protect Smoke. And I'm going to have to pause here for a second. Alright. So, eventually this is to lead to Scorpion to eventually go into Earthrealm anyways, because eventually he is to talk to Raiden, and Raiden is to, at this time, go and be teleporting everyone to the tournament, and eventually this just leads to have Scorpion be teaming up with Sub-Zero to go up against Smoke, and Sector, and of course, God, these names are so freaking goofy. Cyrex, and like battle it out, but eventually this is just to lead to Scorpion going to this temple, opening this door with his hands, and eventually getting even closer and closer to this artifact, for eventually them to obtain this artifact, to eventually retrieve it and take it back to Lin the Grandmaster, to eventually have Lin the Grandmaster take this to Shinnok, and Shinnok is to take this artifact and mix it together with all the others to eventually create the one being. So now we can put a pin in all that, and eventually now we can concentrate on the big battle of moments. So now we have this big brawl of a thing that is to be going on, really between Katana and her people, which are to mainly be Kitaro, which feels kind of like a Goro-esque like character, and Raiko, who is basically seemingly just like another like foot soldier, a guy. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Nightwolf, but like, because he has this kind of like Nightwing kind of like makeup on him, and like eventually he has this long hair, so he reminds me of a mixture of Nightwing and Nightwolf, but like really he doesn't have any of these kinds of abilities. He's just kind of a guy that's just there, in all honesty. So, and also like Katana is to basically just have a lot of the enemies that are to look like the exact same enemies that had taken down Liu Kang's family. Up against them is to, of course, mainly be Jax, Sonya, mainly be Jax and our new character Stryker, which Jax is just to say like, oh yeah, I picked this guy up. And so really there's just to be eventually Liu Kang coming in, or Johnny Cage coming in to ask for these people's surrender, and like Katana is thinking that, oh, Johnny Cage and all of his people are going to surrender. And Johnny Cage is like, no, like, I want you all to surrender. And they're like, what? Like, dude, we obviously have you outnumbered. And Johnny Cage is like, I don't think so. It's like, I have me and my girlfriend, and Sonya is to be out there with this sniper rifle going, I'm not his girlfriend. So Sonya is out in the back just starting to pick off a bunch of these little minion guys, and Johnny Cage is starting to punch through a couple people. And then eventually Jax is to show up, and eventually Stryker is to show up and just try to almost kind of even the odds on the good side of things. But then eventually this all just dwindles down to eventually having everybody else show up, like Kung Lao is to show up. Goes too far. I went too far. Anyways, Kung Lao like comes in, Raiden comes in, everybody starts to come in. And really, like, there is just this endless battling going on. And so finally Shao Kahn just goes to Raiden and is like, you know what? How about we just put together another tournament? Why do we have to wait another 1,000 years for this? And Raiden is like, agreed. And Liu Kang is just like, wait a minute, like, why did we agree to this tournament? And Raiden is like, well, why do we have to leave it to your ancestors or your people, your spawn upon the future? Like, why do we have to rest on that? Why can't we just finish this all right now? So both Raiden and Shao Kahn are to go to these elder gods to ask for another tournament. And of course, these elder gods are to agree to these terms. And but we have Raiden who is to say, well, that's great and all, but I am willing to give up my lordship. I'm willing to give up becoming a god to be involved in this tournament. And they're like, well, are you sure about that? And Raiden's like, yep, I am absolutely sure. So that way I can finally fight beside all my other mortals to defend the Earth. Kind of like in the second one, where eventually, like, Raiden has a drastic attire change. But this time around, it doesn't seem all that drastic. It just feels like instead of him having white eyes, you can see his actual eyes now are kind of fairly blue. So they are to just say, well, okay, Raiden, like, you're just going to end up probably dying like you probably did in the other one. But, nah, whatever. So that pushes us on to having the tournament be on. And so now, instead of having to go all the way to have a ship get us to where we are needing to go, instead they just go through this portal, which is to just take us through this tournament. So really, like, they don't waste like time this time around on the whole like tournament part, because I guess they have plenty and enough characters to do that for us. So eventually the big tournament is to really just start out between these two characters, and I hope that I've gotten a meat and potatoes of like everything that is to happen up until this point, because if not, then that would probably suck. So the first tournament fight is to go up against Johnny Cage and Devore, which Devore is to be this kind of character who has these kind of Iron Spider-Man like extra arms to just kind of go and try to take down Johnny Cage. The first attack is for Johnny Cage to get hit in the nuts, and then after that he never really makes it back from that, to eventually just have him gotten beat up so much that eventually Johnny Cage is just to lose his first fight. So I'm like, man, that sucks. So like, again, they just like get rid of this character as quickly as possible. But like Stryker like didn't even have any time in the sun at all in this movie, because eventually when he is going up to fight and he ends up fighting against Shang Tsung in this movie, it just ends up that Shang Tsung is to eventually just mimic Stryker. And I know I'm getting kind of all over the place. I apologize, but there's some stuff that I kind of want to get out of the way. Stryker ends up mimicking Shang Tsung and looks just like him. And so all of a sudden, like, Stryker is almost fighting himself. But then eventually Shang Tsung goes inside of Stryker, is controlling him, and all of a sudden is to push Stryker into this spiked area where he's to get like his chest with this big, huge, large, like sword size blade into it. Because there's these rungs where you can kind of like push somebody into this one piece where there's a bunch of spikes there and we also see that Stryker is to rip off his own head. So Shang Tsung is to basically kill off Stryker and in a fatal way. So a guy that meant nothing anyways. Really, the guy that meant nothing anyways. So Sonya eventually is to seek vengeance upon the girl who had beaten Johnny. So Sonya goes after Devore and is to just kind of easily take her down, and is to eventually go on and like just kind of like tears like her extra arms off and all this goofy stuff. Anyways, pushing on. So Sonya beats this woman and eventually is going to move on to Shao Kahn, which I'm like, I don't think she's gonna really just get into beating Shao Kahn. I don't think that's gonna happen. So Kung Lao, the very first thing that he's going to do is, of course, try to take down Shao Kahn. And I'm like, yeah, Liu Kang, or Kung Lao. Hey, buddy, like, nice to meet you. So this is another character that just kind of felt like they didn't add anything to his story or whatever compared to the movie. There's a lot of characters that are just like, hey, here's this character, but he's gonna die. So Shao Kahn or Kung Lao is eventually like toss his hat, but like Shao Kahn is eventually just catch it, and so Shao Kahn is eventually take this guy's hat and chuck it back at him, and so Kung Lao is to be killed by his own hat and just have his hat just like drill into his chest and then kill him. Like, but God, Shao Kahn also just not only does that, but he rips Kung Lao in half, like just tears him in half. So this has to be a very brutal death to just say, well, this character wasn't really anything anyways, so sucks to be him. So eventually we have Raiden, who is to... I'm not quite sure exactly who he fights. It's probably one of the, like, I think he ends up fighting, I think, Raiko. And I think Raiko ends up breaking Raiden's ribs. And Raiden is starting to, like, look at his fingers. And he's like, hey, blood, I've never seen this before. But eventually Raiden does, like, get the best of Raiko, I believe. And takes him down. Jax is to go up against Kintaro, which is kind of like the Goro character, but he kind of looks like a Lion-O character also, or a Thundercats kind of character. So Kentaro is to naturally assume that he's just going to go and rip off the metal arms of Jax and beat him like that. But we end up finding out that Jax has a plan for that, where all of a sudden Jax's arms is to all of a sudden just start to shift and move and whatever to be seemingly much more stronger than Kentaro. And so instead, Jax ends up ripping off the arms of Kentaro instead. And so that's what ends up beating Kentaro, is him losing his arms. So eventually we have to get into the big fight, which of course is to be Liu Kang having to, I think, face off against Shang Tsung. And what is to happen seemingly during that fight is Shang Tsung is to seemingly almost use the ability to move his arm, but it seems like he is good enough to fight Shang Tsung with one arm. And also, like, Liu Kang had this weird ability of, like, cutting, like, Shang Tsung in the eye a little bit, or making him bleed a little. It was weird. So it seems like Liu Kang has this weird ability, and so eventually Liu Kang is to eventually take out Shang Tsung, because freaking if we haven't seen that enough in a lot of other movies, like, we get to see that here. So eventually, and so every single character that is involved in that Scorpion mission never comes into this tournament. The only person that really shows up really towards the end of this whole thing is to be like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, because eventually what is to happen is when the Grandmaster is to take his pieces to go and create the one being, that's when basically the Grandmaster and everybody working under him is basically to get killed off. Straight up. So anyways, but there is also this kind of build-up of there also being like Sub-Zero and Scorpion like working together, where Sub-Zero was almost wanting to stab Scorpion with his freeze blade, or freeze dagger, but like Scorpion was telling him, hey, how about we like do this and then you can kill me all you want, but like let's get to this first. And so like Sub-Zero just goes, okay, I'll put things aside and I'll never forgive you, but like, hey, we'll just do this. And then just so back into the tournament. So eventually it just gets to the point where Raiden is to supposedly fight Katana, and what is happening with the Katana fight is Raiden and Katana are fighting like normal fighting. Raiden is to mention to Katana like that she can change sides seemingly at any time, that it's not too late. So Katana is to eventually go and take her blade and to throw it into Shao Kahn's chest to think that she immediately killed him. And so Katana is like, well, I am the queen of all this realm, and so now I am going to forfeit to the Earth realm and say that they have won. Well, Shao Kahn just gets back up and's like, dude, you didn't take me down that freaking easily. So Katana, like, they took her forfeit into consideration, but like that still means that all these people have to come at Shao Kahn, because technically he's not dead yet. Plus also, like, Katana wasn't in Mortal Kombat with Shao Kahn, so it doesn't make any difference. So So eventually, what is to happen is Raiden is to, of course, fight Shokan. So Raiden is to get all of these because, like, Shokan has this weird ability of like just creating weapons seemingly out of energy. So we just bizarrely have this like Green Lantern thing going on with Shokan, where he's like constructing all these weapons and chucking them at Raiden, to eventually have like Raiden getting all these spears like chucked into his chest, and then he ends up falling over. And Raiden, before he is to die, is to try to tell Liu Kang that, hey, your parents loved you just like I. His head ends up getting crushed, and so Raiden can't tell Liu Kang that he loved him before he ended up dying. And it's like, that's going to be some motivation for Liu Kang, who's basically lost his brother and also technically lost a father. So that's going to make him just so freaking angry to try and take on Shokan, because he's the only one that's left. So now we basically have all the good guys just trying to go after Shokan. They're all just trying to make their way, but eventually they just easily get like slapped down. Basically, Sonya goes up and gets stabbed in the leg, and then just gets kind of like just forwarded away. Jax is to try to eventually go after Shokan, but that was kind of a joke. And so everybody who is left on the good side of things tries to go up against Shokan, and most of them all fail. And so that just leads to just have Liu Kang left. So I'm like, of course it's going to be Liu Kang left. I'm like, of course it's going to be Liu Kang, because everyone else is just going to get freaking toasted. So Liu Kang is to now fight Shokan. And here is when we actually get Liu Kang, who is now like freaking Dragon Ball Z Liu Kang. And he is to now like have this fire ability, like as if this is like the last dragon, where he's to have like glow in his hands. You got that glow, and so like Liu Kang is to channel this fire within, and to do all of the moves that he's actually known for. Like Liu Kang does the whole like kicking in the air movement, and like we didn't see the Shoryuken whatever like Dragon Ball Z move where he ends up like putting his hands together and like pushing up against the person's chest. We didn't see that move, I don't believe, but like we saw the kicking maneuver that he's famous for doing. So, but yeah, so with Liu Kang and his fire element, because he's in the zone, ends up taking down Shokan. And so now Earth Realm has won, and so the Elder Gods have came and have granted Liu Kang with this almost godlike power, but they're not quite sure that it's going to be enough, because since now that Shinnok has put together this thing called the One Being, that is all of a sudden to leave Liu Kang now forced to now have to use all of his power in his possession to try to take down this One Being, which means bizarrely Liu Kang is to turn into this giant snake dragon of a thing to try and take down. It's like a snake lizard of a thing. It's weird looking. To try and take down this One Being, where this One Being kind of looks like Surta from Thor Ragnarok. He kind of looks a lot like that. The fiery being from Thor Ragnarok, the thing that you end up seeing in the very beginning of the movie, where Thor is be like dangling around on that chain, circling around, and he's like, "Wait a minute, like the chain's moving again. Give me a break here. Let me be facing you." And then so the chain just continues to spin around, and he's like, "Dude, I'm not even doing this." So, anyways, so basically, like there's a giant snake thing fighting Surta from Thor Ragnarok, and so that's going on for whatever reason. And so, because Liu Kang's spirit animal thing is not going well against this one being, all of a sudden, Scorpion and Sub Zero are to come on by and just kind of supposedly even the odds, which I don't know exactly what they do to really even things. Because there's not much that both either Scorpion or Sub Zero to do. Like, it's just, I guess, to give Liu Kang a breather for a second. But then eventually Liu Kang is to come up with the ability to eventually to start tearing down this one being, and eventually starts to figure out how to minimize its power. And then Liu Kang, who is now like this weird actual like fiery character of himself, like grabs the one being and kind of crushes it, kind of takes it out. And so now, like, Liu Kang is to look like the size of Johnny Cage and Sonya and whatever, and they're all to ask him, it's like, well, what are you now? Are you, like, still mortal? Are you a god? Like, what are you? And Liu Kang is like, well, I don't even really know, because nobody in the script really told me. So really, that's just how the movie is to eventually just kind of fizzle out. That I guess Earth Realm had won, and everybody is to go back to where they were, like with the exclusion of people who had died during this movie. So eventually, I think this is probably going to lead us to a sequel. What sequel will this be? I don't know, but there's probably going to be enough money probably going into this movie to probably garner a sequel, but who knows, because like immediately this thing went into streaming, so like it could do well, it might, some people probably will forget about it, some people are just like, I don't think that I'm going to go through and watch a Mortal Kombat Annihilation makeover, which wasn't as good as Scorpion's Revenge. So with that said, yeah, I think that's all that I had to say about this movie. Uh, I think I covered most of it, but maybe the ending isn't perfect or whichever. But like, there doesn't seem to be a villain set up for this one. It just kind of feels like this movie just ends. So I would have probably assumed that they probably didn't have enough content to figure out what was to go on for the third movie, because they didn't ever make a real Mortal Kombat third film. So basically, since there's probably not much to copy and paste from, because I didn't go to the very end to see if there was like any like end credit thing that was going to lead to another thing. I think they should probably just end up just using whatever is left from characters that they haven't used yet and just splash those in, and just have to maybe just create like some kind of villain for the third film. That would be interesting, because I think like Mortal Kombat movies, there's been a freaking billion of them. Like, they could go on to eventually just make another one of these with much more current villain like thing. But with that said, I think I cover this, but if there was anything that I missed, I do apologize. This movie was just, it was just okay. Like, it kind of made a big step backwards, because it really didn't improve from its predecessor. So, that sucks. But other than that, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.